Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have you here today at the ACA webinar. Our topic today, Congress can pass residence-based taxation, RBT. Here's how. Charles Bruce, who is ACA legal counsel and also chairman of the ACA Global Foundation, and myself, Mary Louise Serrato, the executive director. We're going to walk you through a presentation that should take about 45 minutes, and that'll be followed by 30 minutes of questions that you can input into the question box. Everyone is on mute, so there's no possibility to raise hands and speak, but again, there is the question box where you can input questions, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. But if not, you can always send questions into us. So with that, I will ask Julie Sanford, who's our administrative director and sits in the background and helps us out enormously with these presentations, to get right into it and to put up our first slide. Great. So as I mentioned, we're going to do about a 45-minute presentation with a 30-minute Q&A. If there are any questions that don't get answered or you want to follow up with either myself or Charles, our email addresses are up there. You can note those, and we'll provide them at the end of the presentation as well. A reminder that nothing said in this webinar should be treated as legal or accounting or investment advice. It's purely informational. And both of us will try to identify when we are speaking on behalf of the organization or might have some views of our own on some of the topics we cover and issues we're going to speak about. Again, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers, and you can provide those in the question box. If we don't get to those, please do send us a follow-up email. We really enjoy doing these webinars and really appreciate the participation by everyone who attends. We really do want to learn from you. We really do want to hear from you. So please, if we don't get to your question or if you have a comment, please do send it our way.
It is absolutely the case that we've learned from these webinars and the back and forth and the questions and answers, and we learn every day from the communications coming in to ACA. I think Mary Louise is handling most of those, but every day we learn stuff from our members and from others, and a lot of it is very good stuff.
Great. So Julie, if you go to the next slide, just give a little background on myself and Charles. So as I mentioned, I'm the executive director of ACA. I've been with the organization since 2002, and I've been the executive director for the past 11 years. My background is in marketing and advertising, and I am the primary contact for Congress and officials at Treasury Department, IRS, and a lot of the other administrative offices, as well as I'm responsible for operations and assisted by Julie Sanford, who's the administrative director. And that's just a short bio on me. I'll let Charles introduce himself, let you all know who he is if you're not familiar with him.
Mary Louise, I know you're pleased that I did not insert in here my favorite picture of your office in the House Raven office building, where she uses a telephone booth there as her office frequently. My name is Charles Bruce. I'm, as Mary Louise said, chairman of the ACA GF, the foundation, and legal counsel of ACA. I'm an American tax lawyer, so-called international tax lawyer, which is just a tax lawyer with some jurisdiction thrown in. and I've practiced in Washington, London, and Lausanne. I currently divide my time when the plane is flying between London and Washington. And at various times, I have been on the staff of the Senate Finance Committee as one of the tax attorneys up there. I've also taught at the Law School Institute for Foreign Law and Foreign Studies in Hamburg, and in the Georgetown Law School as well, which incidentally is about 3 blocks from the Senate side of the Congress. Very convenient when you teach there. This point might be of some small interest. I'm very familiar with the side-by-side analysis that you'll find on the ACA website, going through current law and what might have to be changed if you go to RBT. I'm very familiar, as is Mary Louise, with the DEG exercise, which we're going to be talking about. And I'm very familiar with what I'll call the ways of Congress, having worked there. Should we go to the next thing?
Yep. Julie, if you can, great. Charles, I'll let you take the introduction to the 2 organizations.
Yeah, this is just sort of the organizational layout. There are 2 entities. American Citizens Abroad, Inc., which is a Section 501c4 advocacy organization, and American Citizens Abroad Global Foundation, which is a qualified charitable organization. This was not invented by us, this structure. I must confess, this follows the structure of many similar organizations, in particular the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we're very comfortable with it. And what's more, everybody else is very comfortable with it. When we go in to talk to offices and they see who we are and they check us out, as they always do, they can see, we see exactly how you're set up and how you're fully qualified. They are comfortable with this, which makes us comfortable with it. Other thoughts, Mary Louise, about this?
So yeah, just to add on to Charles' point at the end there, it's really important for these offices to understand who they're working with and to have a feeling that you're quote unquote legit. So the status of the 2 organizations being 2 qualified nonprofits really gives the offices that sort of comfort. They know what they're dealing with. We're reliable, we're qualified. So it really does have an important effect on our work, and also in terms of these offices reaching out to us, because they know that we're here in Washington, D.C., again, that we're qualified organizations. So there's a lot of confidence when they're looking to find data and information and coming to ACA and ACAGF.
And even on a personal level, I'll say, when they see you coming down the hall, they know exactly who you are and who you're going to be talking for. They've seen you before. Should we go to the next piece of the puzzle here?
Yeah, I'll let you take it away to talk about the hardcore tax subjects.
that I'm afraid is my expression. So first point is that there are many new and not so new players in the tax legislative world here in Washington. People in the administration, Treasury Department, IRS, House of Representatives, Senate, dozens of others. There are probably 300 to 500 people that work on tax subject around the legislative process. A big point is that ACA is not a new player, and that's a big positive point. Focusing on the IRS here, it is undergoing a reorganization, updating its systems, adding personnel, almost certainly getting significant new funds. large amounts of support. And by the way, that rings the note that actually has bipartisan support. Maybe not bipartisan support for $100 billion, but a bipartisan support for big amounts of a contribution. Mary Louise knows more about what's going on at the IRS at the moment. You might give a thought about what you see just at this moment going on.
So sometimes it seems counterintuitive, I think, to the community that ACA's in there with quote unquote the IRS. But the important thing to remember is that they can be very influential, and the more knowledge that they have on the problems and the filing and compliance problems of the community, the better for us. There is a new initiative, the Taxpayer First Act, and the IRS brought in a lot of voices into that process. They wanted to hear from a lot of quote unquote overlooked populations and underserved populations. And Americans overseas is definitely one of the populations that they understand is underserved. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because they're starting to understand the complications and the need to facilitate for the community the ability to get answers to their tax filing and tax compliance questions. And it's also giving them a very good line of sight into where the problems are and being able for them to offer suggestions on corrective measures.
I don't want to digress on this point, but they are very interested in the IRS and others in the administration, very interested in some of the things that we do. They're very interested in our tax preparer directory. They're very interested in our work on the numbers, which we're going to get to in detail here in a minute. They're very interested in our relationship with State Department Federal Credit Union and the issues of the electronic direction of everything with taxes, paying taxes, getting refunds, getting payments like their COVID payments. They're very interested in that nitty-gritty stuff, and they come to us to compare notes. We've talked about the overlooked population. There is, I want to bring to everyone's attention, if you haven't already seen it, there is a growing, burgeoning interest in anti-money laundering rules and implementation of these rules. We won't digress on that, but it is that movement which you saw writ large with FATCA continues, and a lot of the thinking and impetus is there. I won't go into example after example of that. So I think that touches some I'll call it pre-hardcore tax subjects, and now we'll turn to the tax subjects. Mary Louise, I'm going to start off on this, but if I may, I'm going to drag you in again and again. So you've got to understand, we think you've got to understand the landscape. You need to know not just RBT, but if you want RBT to get put in the law, you need to know what the other pieces are, because nothing exists just by itself. So let's talk a bit about the other pieces. The Biden administration has tabled a series of large, and I mean large, pieces of legislation. The COVID-related plan, the American Rescue Plan, that was enacted, and it was put together quickly, successfully, and it has been rolled out. The next big piece is the infrastructure. It's not just infrastructure, but infrastructure and more legislation. And that is the American Jobs Plan. And then there's the investment in children and families called the American Families Plan. That's another big piece of legislation. Embedded in the American Jobs Plan is something called Made in America tax plan. You may wonder, well, when do we get to something that really hits exactly what we're interested in? This is what hits what we're most interested in. This is President Biden's tax plan, or at least some of it, including reworking parts of President Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Alongside that, congressional players have come forward and placed what's being called a framework, and that's a set of proposals put forward by Senators Wyden, Brown, and Warner. That framework addresses some of the same issues as in Biden's big plan. It's not that they're at loggerheads, but the senators, as senators are wont to do, they want to have their say, they have their ideas, they have their spin on these subjects, and so that framework is their spin on these subjects. There will be other things that look like the existing Senate framework proposal, and they'll be coming forward regularly. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see a half dozen of them. So it's a challenge to see what's happening and to watch what's rolling out. Will there be big tax legislation in 2021? We think yes, for sure. Will there be several pieces of tax legislation? We think yes. Will it all be one, or will it be broken into different pieces? I personally think it'll be different pieces, but there'll be several pieces. Will the subject of territorial taxation for corporations be revisited? We think yes. And that takes us to several mind-bending technical contexts, which we're mercifully not going to get into in great detail. That's you'll hear the terms GILTI, foreign-derived intangible income, BEAT, all that. Those subjects those are corporate tax subjects, and they all touch upon the subject of territoriality for corporations, which, by the way, means U.S. corporations would not be taxed on their foreign income. That, of course, is the absolute cousin of residence-based taxation for individuals, which means that individuals will not be taxed on their foreign income. They're both going in the same direction. One subject is corporations, the other subject is individuals. Does all this create an opportunity for correcting mistakes with respect to corporations owned by expat Americans? And the answer is yes. Everybody should be aware, you're talking about corporations, but there are, of course, a lot of corporations that are owned by individuals living outside the United States. And by the way, at first glance, you might think, well, whatever the name of it is, that doesn't sound like a corporation. For US tax purposes, that probably is a corporation. So all this talk about changes for American-owned corporations also hit all those corporations created under non-US law, under foreign law, owned by US people. It hits them. So quickly, things can get pretty complicated. But the trick is not to throw up your hands and say, oh my God, it's complicated. The trick is to knuckle down and pay attention and understand it, because all these pieces affect each other. Can switching from citizenship-based taxation, which is what we have, obviously, to residence-based taxation, RBT, can that be considered? Yes. I don't think we need to pause, Mary Louise, unless you tell me to explain what citizenship-based taxation is. Everybody that's listening to this gets it. That's you, ladies and gentlemen. You're taxed no matter what, and where the income comes from or anything else, you're taxed because you're a US citizen. So will the subject of switching from CBT to RBT be considered? We think yes. Then the last point, almost all these topics are relevant to individuals, and the permutations are revenue neutrality is relevant. Guarding against abuse is real relevant and getting more relevant every day as Congress drills into this. Avoiding zero taxed income, that is income that either corporations have or that individuals have that are not taxed anywhere. That's a subject that people perk up about. Some people cheer, some people boo, but a lot of people pay attention. Role of tax havens that comes to the fore, two-way exchange of tax information comes to the fore. All of those subjects could be subjects of separate webinars. We're not going to do that. So, should we,
So just on
that you think, Mary Louise?
Yeah, just on the final point, we do hear a lot of things about revenue neutrality, and it's impossible and it's not important, and a lot of these topics about guarding against abuse and other elements that ACA advocates for in a move towards residence-based taxation. And definitely Charles is going to talk a little bit more about revenue neutrality in the next upcoming slides. But the offices that we are in, it would be foolhardy to pretend that these things are not important and they're not going to be key to a move towards residence-based taxation. We know this because the offices we are in, they are highly, highly aware and acute to the problem of tax evasion and abuse. And they do understand, it may not seem like they do, but they do understand that there is a different population out there of Americans overseas. But they are very, very pinpointed on the problems of abuse and tax evasion and cost. So thinking that these are things that only ACA is talking about or we think is important, we can tell you from the offices that are deeply digging into this information, these are going to be important areas and we need to pay attention to them.
And it's not just one team or the other that's interested in these subjects. It's not just Republicans or Democrats or lefties or righties or whatever. Across the board, they seem to be interested in it. And in fact, the recent Senate Finance Committee on closing the tax gap shows that. You can see people from both sides leaning into this subject. And I will plug this, and that is, I think our statements on that subject and other statements sent into the Senate Finance Committee give you a lot more detail and flavor of this subject. So one thing is to look at what we're telling the Senate Finance Committee and other committees on these subjects. So let's go another step. So let's go to the next. And that is, will the political fighting between Democrats and Republicans kill any big tax bill? The Republican leadership has said recently, but quite unambiguously, that it will not support any changes to the 2017 tax law, which we were just talking about, and that attempts by the administration to make a change would cross their red line, meaning in the words of my grandson, it would be a no-no. They would not favor that. They would oppose it. Now, some of these changes, focusing for the moment on the changes on the corporate rules, are tied to infrastructure proposals because they're intended to raise funds which will be spent on infrastructure. And the Biden administration has said that they also want to close the unintended loopholes. I do believe, I guess some people could debate this, but I think it's the overwhelming view that in the 2017 law, not everything was perfect. things became very hurried, so there were unintended things that went into the bill. And they've also had a chance to look at how this is being taken up, and they can say, that's not quite the way we thought it would play out. So there will be, you can call that closing loopholes or addressing unintended consequences, however fancy you want to be about it. There's a good reason to go back in to some degree into that subject. Also, this is very simple politics now. Infrastructure funding can be made extremely popular, at least to voters. If you have a bridge falling down across your river, infrastructure can be made extremely popular. And everybody knows that, and things will be taken in that direction. I think, and Mary Louise, I'll be interested what you'll say on this. It seems to me that whether there'll be compromises arrived at, what will happen in negotiations, that remains to be seen. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot remains to be seen, but I think we can see by the composition that of both House and Senate that some sort of midway point is going to have to arrive on a lot of these issues. We see it right now with a lot of the bills that are being discussed. So I think there's probably going to be a meeting of the minds on a lot of these proposals.
These players, by the way, Biden himself, McConnell, Pelosi, the heads of the tax writing committees, these are not novices. They know this process and they know the negotiation process. So, and they know how people will dance around the room, I'll put it that way, getting ready for this process. A point that I want to make, and I want to make it big, is embedded in this process will be certain hard and fast rules. RBT almost certainly would have to be attached to another bill. That bill might be a big tax bill or one of several big tax bills. So it'll be attached to another bill. For that to happen successfully, it has to survive, I'll call it, objections under Senate rules. These are all Senate rules. To get that through, it must survive these so-called budget reconciliation rules. And if those rules are applied, and they would be applied in the scenario I'm painting, the RBT provisions would absolutely have to be revenue neutral under the terms of the reconciliation provisions. If it wasn't, any senator could rise, make a point of order, and the RBT provisions would be stripped from the bill. That has happened again and again. It's happened several times in connection with the TCJA, even for lovely little provisions that everybody thought everybody would love, but they were bounced out because someone, if you have 100 senators, I hope I'm not giving any secrets away, but one or two of them are kind of ornery. So someone is bound to stand up and say, no. That loses revenue. It violates the reconciliation rule. Boom, it will be out of there, and it would take about 3 minutes. Back to the big point, that is why ACA keeps saying again and again that it's important that RBT be revenue neutral. We also think it's important that it be strong against abuse, because if it's not strong against abuse, you're going to blow out the revenue. And also you're going to make some people very unhappy because they think it's going to create too many good things for the wrong kind of people in their estimation. So but the reconciliation rules, big reason why we think it needs to be revenue neutral. Should we mercifully move on, Mary Louise?
Yeah, just one point on that. Again, I can't stress enough on Charles' point there on revenue neutrality and the importance of numbers. Maybe not so much my point on revenue neutrality, but the importance of numbers. We see this again in the offices that we are meeting with, and we've had some phenomenal meetings that started at the beginning of this year and have continued into the first quarter, being called back, and it's clear that you can't get away from the numbers question and the numbers game. These offices are looking deeply into that subject. So again, the meetings that we're seeing, the discussions that we're having, the callbacks that we're getting from Treasury, this is definitely something that they're interested in. And you can get good numbers. Charles will talk a little bit more about that and about our work with the District Economics Group. We shouldn't believe that those numbers aren't out there and you can't formulate a number and can't get to revenue neutrality. It can be done, and it's going to be important. We know it because that's the message that we're getting from the offices.
Looking back, it may be that I didn't really present the punchline the way I should have, and that is why are we talking about the budget reconciliation? Because if they cannot agree, then the Democrats can force the issue, and they can force it through the budget reconciliation process, and that will avoid any possibility of a filibuster. So that is the punchline that I forgot to add. Next, should we go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
The how to enact, how not to go about the process. Well, let's see. And this, I don't want to make this sound like we know it all or this is going to happen. This is our best reading of the situation. And by the way, it's consistent with the reading of other people because we're constantly comparing notes with other groups in Washington, not just those interested in RBT, but others. So how to proceed? Add it to a large bill modifying the corporate rules. Again, needs to be revenue neutral, tight against abuse. Try to make it so that no one is worse off than they would be under the existing rules. One way of doing that, for example, might be if you can leave 9/11 in place. Is it better to just chip away at issues that we don't like, that hurt Americans overseas, and try to do that in the regulatory process? We don't. I don't know if I should say I or we. I think I can say we. We don't think that that's a good. We don't think that's the best approach because it really dissipates the effort. You go in and you start talking about this, this, and this, and immediately you're telling them, well, I guess we don't really need to focus on RBT, do we? We'll go do one or two of these other little things. So it really requires a vision of what's required. We think that's RBT. You've got to make up your mind and then you've got to go get it. Americans abroad. The next point is people need to come together. Americans abroad, US and non-US companies owned by or employing expats, advocacy groups, everyone, we think, need to ally themselves behind RBT. People need to push in the same direction. That doesn't mean that we need to decide today all the little details and decide, yes, I like that. No, I don't like, no, I'll change that. And in a sense, try to hammer everything out and then hold hands and move in the same direction. No, be very hard to do that. It would take months and months. We think that people should just come together and say to the world that we all think that it is a good idea to move away from CBT to residence-based taxation. And then we can really pay attention and work on the details. I know it's a little uncomfortable for some people to walk into a room, a room like the one behind me and not know where all the furniture is and be asked to stroll through the room. It gives them some hesitancy. This would be easier because there's not a lot of furniture here, but it's difficult for people to move ahead when they don't know where everything's going to shake out. In my view, you have to do that in the legislative process, and you definitely have to do it today. Mary Louise, you know more about the process than I do, but what do you think?
A couple of things. Just wanted to mention, because some people on the call might be familiar with ACA and our advocacy for same country exemption, and often we hear, well, isn't that your replacement for RBT? And that's definitely not the case. We're firmly behind residence-based taxation. Same country exemption is something that would help alleviate the current problems that Americans are facing, but it's never been intended as a substitute for RBT. We often do go to the administrative offices in Congress and say, here's some things that could alleviate the current filing and compliance, but that's not the focus of what we want. What we want is RBT, because that's going to be the ultimate, corrective measure. Again, to Charles' point, I think it's the process of the legislative offices to really dig through the detail on legislation and say, how is RBT going to be drafted and implemented? We all have lots of ideas, and that's great. And ACA is always happy when people send us a particular idea about how you might tackle this or that income stream. But really, it isn't up to us to bring that to the Congress. It's up to us to bring the problems, to give them the data and the research and the numbers. And it's up for those offices, with our guidance coming back to us, which we see that they do, to really develop how to move forward. So everybody does need to get behind RBT, the concept. We'll talk in the next slide a little bit about the Residence-Based Taxation Coalition that's come together. That's a really great group that is just calling for focus, more education on RBT to push it forward.
Okay, let's see if there's something here. Another point that we think is important and we have done is that is doing homework. It is important to know who these people are who are going to be making these decisions, not only the members, but very important, the staffs and the people actually working on it. And so a lot of these people we know already, and we've known for some time. And we know them today, and we knew them yesterday when they had a different job. So we've followed them almost through their careers. I think, without exception, all of them are well-known players if you pay attention. And you can learn a lot even before you go into the meeting room and have meetings with them, as we have. But before doing that, if you do your homework, you can see, here's the article that they wrote 8 years ago on the subject, and you can really, in a sense, get into their thinking. So very important to know who you're dealing with, because then you can take people in the direction that you know they want to go anyway. One other point, people will wonder, is it bad to have so many damn things going on at the same time? So many big moving pieces. Isn't that bad? Of course, first of all, we don't have any choice, but is that something to bemoan? I strongly believe the answer is no. Life in the legislative business, if you will, is easier when you have a lot of pretty big moving pieces, because then you can look for your opportunities and deal with it. You do need to pay attention. You do need to be adept at seeing with peripheral vision what's going on to the left and right. I just like to throw out the plate tectonics view. When one piece moves, other pieces are going to move too. So when one piece like compliance moves, that can affect what's happening with RBT. I won't go into it too much, but you really need to have a peripheral vision. In the past, there were just a few players and a few places you had to go with. That has just grown and grown and grown. As I said, there are probably 300 to 500 people in Washington that deal with these subjects, and that was not always that way by any means. And 5, 6 years ago, you say it's important to watch what's going on in OECD. Most people in Washington would say, huh? So now it's not, huh? These other things need to be watched too. Mary Louise, help us on that.
So to Charles' point, it's important to know these people, know their history. We've seen and been dealing with a lot of people who I can tell you in the past, maybe 6 years ago, were firmly against any sort of movement towards RBT, and now they are definitely in there looking at this and saying something needs to be done. Yeah, we think we've got to touch on this subject. We've got to move in another direction. So it's really important, to Charles's point, to know those players, to also watch what's going on in the environment, because too much focus just on what we're doing in our little space and not thinking about it in the context of everything else that's going on Capitol Hill, that's not going to work. You have to really, really be looking at the other elements, the other discussions that are going on, and be able to fit your issue into that. In terms of the numbers, again, it's really important to think that numbers and data is not going to be important, that the Congress should do this because it's the right and fair thing to do. There's definitely a fairness aspect to this. Congress gets that, Treasury, IRS gets that, but it isn't just going to happen on fairness. There has to be a real discussion on the size of the community, the income, investment makeup, profile of the community, and a lot of other data, which fortunately ACA and our previous research work has been able to provide these offices, and more research that we're currently doing that Charles is gonna dig into right now. That's really important.
Looking at the clock on the wall, I have to hurry myself up now. So I will throw out this point. I'll just tell you that I believe that most of the staffs on Capitol Hill believe that something's going to happen with RBT, because we see it in the way that they're coming to us. I may be wrong, but that's my feeling. Next is ACA's thoughts. Yeah, well, you've already got it up. Very good for you. So we think we need to keep an eye peeled for vehicles to which RBT could be attached. So the corporate legislation touching upon territorial provisions for corporations would be very important. This might be made smaller, and it might be modified, and different things come out of negotiations. We need to watch that like a hawk. The next is other vehicles. Alternatively, piggyback on a bank on a bill designed to close the tax gap, because that bill will have elements dealing with the so-called offshore element. Let's not digress the debate. There is, there isn't, there's what, the what. Congress believes that there is a major element of that dealing with offshore. When they go into that, that is an opening for RBT. It's complicated, it's nuanced, it can be tricky, but that is a possible vehicle. We can talk more about that another time. Most important right now, absolutely, is to update and improve the ACA DEG revenue analysis done in 2017. It needs to be updated because time has marched on. It needs to be updated and changed because in peeling back layers of the onion, we see things, including things going on in the cross-border communities between Mexico and the U.S., Canada and the U.S. There's stuff in there that we've gone into and will continue to go into. So that going into that deeper into that analysis is absolutely, we think, critical. It's an attractive development for the people in Treasury and Capitol on Capitol Hill because they are very interested in the subject also, and it's very informative. Somebody's going to get deeply into the subject of how to sculpt RBT, and those numbers will tell you how to sculpt. A very simplistic way to say is go down the side-by-side analysis, see what you would have to cut into, then look to the right and see what it would cost. Well, we have some of the numbers that would be along the right-hand side of that page, but we don't have all of them. And the better, more granular, as they say, those numbers are, the better the decisions will be. If you don't have good numbers, to do that exercise, you're going to have to create cushions. You're going to have to be overly aggressive, overly hard when you write those provisions. We don't want to be overly anything. So the numbers are key. Is RBT dead if President Biden's American Jobs Plan or Made in America plan don't go forward, if they're stalled somehow? And we think the answer is no. That other vehicles, which we don't even see today, something that might pop up in the next framework bill, but surely something along the lines of a close the gap bill would be a strong vehicle. I'll pause there, Mary Louise, or would you like to zip along to, why don't you say something about vehicle?
Yeah, just one comment on the offshore. I know everyone gets very nervous about when they hear Congress talking about tax gap and offshore. Many of you probably sat through, as we did, the Senate Finance Committee meetings. I won't talk about why sometimes it's talked up in those meetings in the way it is, but the people on the ground who are actually doing these work on the committee level, they do have a good indication of the difference between the two offshore communities, the real tax evader, criminal tax evader, and the average American. A lot of that has been helped along by ACA's work and other groups' work in educating. We certainly have more to do, and that's why the numbers from District Economics, the DEG report, is so important, because it really shows the snapshot of those people, the people who aren't hiding money overseas, the people who are simply living overseas. So just that little nuance, they do understand the difference.
Okay, so we're rounding the last curve here and heading for the finish line. Some points that I would like to press. First, I think we all need to get positive on this subject. I have been struck again and again in talking with Americans overseas. They're unenthusiastic, unhopeful view of this. I say they just look down and wonder, can this be done? What's going to happen? I just believe that, strongly believe that people need to get positive on this and realize that it is a real possibility, because it is. It absolutely is a real possibility. So people need to get positive about this subject. An element of that is people do need to pull together. So we see steps in that direction. I don't think we've really said too much about the alliance which happened just, what, a month ago? What can we say about that?
Well, in January, a group came together, the Residence-Based Taxation Coalition, RBT Coalition. You can see up there on the screen some of the members, and the membership is open to any group. The purpose of the RBT Coalition is simply to get behind the concept that now is the time for residence-based taxation. It's the right thing to do. And it's great to have different groups from different sectors supporting it. That's really, really beneficial when we go up to Congress to point over to other groups that are working on this. And here you can see that we have AmChams in there, relocation companies, tax investment organizations, advocacy organizations. So this is really important to show that there is widespread support for RBT across a lot of different sectors. So go to the website, the RBT Coalition website. This is not an ACA initiative. This is not ACA. This is a collective of groups that have come together and really want to put more focus and more support behind residence-based taxation.
I hope that some of the questions that come in will bring us back to this alliance subject, because people are looking for things that they can do. Speaking of that, the last point, I absolutely encourage you to contribute to the DEG project. That's run out of American Citizens Abroad Global Foundation. I do chair that. It is a fully qualified charity. Contributions are deductible, just like any other charitable contribution. Check with your return preparer accountant. I have, and I believe the answer is, well, first of all, it's absolutely deductible. But sometimes people ask, does that mean I can hive off some of my COVID relief payment and use that, a portion of that to contribute here? It sounds like a double whammy. And the answer is yes. That is a permissible double whammy. You can do that. We have our goal is 75,000. We are today, I think this is correct, Mary Louise, Julie, $51,716. We're looking for $75,000. Actually, we're bravely moving ahead with this. Mary Louise, what can you say about that?
So yeah, as of this morning, I think we're around about 52 or 53,000. We're going out and we're on Gofundme, we're on the ACA website. Again, can't stress enough the importance of getting this data and research into these offices. We have seen it, Charles and I have seen it in the meetings where we've presented the 2017 data. We have had follow-up meetings. They want more of this. They want to understand better. They're appreciative to get that data. So it is really, really important because it's going to help the community. It's really going to help show who the community is and why that community needs the relief. So go to our website, share our page with people that you know, share it on your LinkedIn, share it on Facebook, tweet it, help us get the word out. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that covers our so-called presentation on it. I'm very looking forward to questions. Mary Louise, can you take us in that direction, please?
So I think we have a couple of questions that have come in. Let me get to this one. I'm not very good with the questions. Maybe Julie, can you help me out a little bit on the questions there? Because I got to pull up.
Sure, Mary Louise. Do you want me to just start reading the first question?
Sure.
Okay. Until RBT is passed, Is there any effort to alleviate the immediate constraints on investing in PFICs, particularly in the context of the EU and MiFID2 rules? EU expats are effectively barred from investing in ETFs and mutual funds because US banks would block EU residents from buying ETFs, and buying EU-based ETFs gets us into PFIC reporting.
I think I get the gist of that because of the quality of the audio. I may not have gotten every word, but if I get the gist of it, the answer is attention's being given to that subject. It's really coming to IRS and Treasury, apart from when people just come in and say about it, but also in dealing with voluntary disclosure, they see that people have been having a terrible time wrestling with reporting PFICs. There've been a lot of mistakes. And penalties have been imposed, and taxpayers have said, "My God, help me! This is impossible." And so they're aware of the issue, and I do believe that they're trying to figure out ways to deal with it. But that's probably not a congressional thing. Probably not a congressional thing. It may fit in as an argument, but I believe that's Treasury and IRS. And I'll leave it at that. For the moment. Let's see. I see some maybe I can throw in this. I see one question about will work on an RBT bill actually go back and start with the old holding bill of a couple of years ago? I'll give a thought, and then Mary Louise, you can give a thought. I think the holding bill is extremely important. It was an icebreaker. It's the first time a bill came forward in Congress that addressed directly RBT. People will notice that it went so far. It did get drafting attention. It did not get revenue estimates. And everyone, including the sponsor, realized that that would have been a huge issue of revenue, large amounts of revenue loss. But it's an extremely useful exercise. Would they start with the holding bill? I don't think they'll, in a detailed way, take the holding a draft and just go from there. But I may be wrong. Mary Louise?
Well, the holding bill was really just very much an outline to say we want to go in the direction of not taxing foreign income earned by Americans who are legitimately overseas. So I think, to Charles' point, it did put down the marker. It did start a conversation. It's important in that those offices know that there is a real interest, and not just by Congressman Holding, because he obviously reached out to others, and a conversation began. To Charles' point, not sure how the offices would tackle, but I think maybe at this point they would they'd not exactly start with that bill, but it's an important step. A couple of questions have come in about the RBT Coalition, and there are a couple questions as to have we reached out to other groups like Democrats abroad and Republicans overseas, and is Carolyn Maloney on board? She is the co-chair of the Americans Abroad Caucus. So on the RBT Coalition, again, this is it's open to everyone. It's not ACA that is driving the RBT Coalition. There is office management. They're free to come forward. We encourage, when we talk to individuals and contacts we have in a lot of organizations, we encourage them to please join, but it really is a decision within their organization and their management. So if any of you on this call are associated with Democrats abroad, Republicans overseas, or another organization that you would like to see join the coalition, please get in touch with that organization, their management, let them know about about the coalition and have them come forward. You can find all the contact information on that website.
I'll pitch in that it does not have to be a huge mammoth organization either. It can be a smaller organization. It can be a social club. It can be anything. It's funny what will catch people's attention in this process. There is a role for luck. I know a couple of years ago in meeting with the Holdings office, I happened to mention I have a lot of relatives in Bowling Green, Kentucky. My God, we didn't talk about anything for the next 15 minutes other than Bowling Green, Kentucky. So that's just part of the deal. What other questions do we have?
So there was also a question about Carolyn Maloney and the Americans Abroad Caucus. So the caucus has to be reintroduced every Congress. It hasn't yet been reintroduced in this Congress, but she definitely is interested in doing that. Obviously, a lot of priorities for the new Congress, and this isn't on her top 10, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. They're very aware. We keep in contact with her offices, other members of the Americans Abroad Caucus. Right now, it's missing a Republican co-chair. So again, anyone on this call, if your representative is Republican and is an interest in this issue, please reach out to them and ask them to join the Americans Abroad Caucus. ACA keeps in contact with all these offices, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing more interest as things push ahead on the subject of RBT and tax reform. Julie, do you, there's one question, if RBT will be passed, will Americans overseas still have to file a tax return? Charles, do you want to?
I'll say something about that. Yes, in all probability, they're going to have to file some piece of paper. It's not going to be anything like the tax return that you're filing now. So if you're filing a tax return now, and you've got the foreign earned income in there, and you've got the foreign tax credits and this and that, you've got easily 20, 30 pages plus statements and everything. This will probably bring it down to a couple of pages. You'll need to identify yourself and that you are entitled to RBT. That is, that you are a real live resident overseas. So they'll want to know that. And if you filed last year on that basis, they'll want you to confirm that you are still a real live resident overseas. You haven't moved back to Sacramento or something. So they'll want that sort of paperwork. If you have U.S. source income, you'll need to report something because that will remain taxable. So if you have interest, dividends, or earnings that have a U.S. source, you'll need to file something on that. But it will be much shorter, much simpler than what you have now. Okay?
Another question that's come in, and we often hear this, if RBT is passed, will things like Social Security be reduced? Will you lose your voting rights? So Social Security is a completely separate being and beast. If you've worked in the United States and paid into Social Security, you still have the right to your benefits. I don't think anything on passage of RBT would change any of that. And on voting, we don't see that either, or at least personally, I don't see that as being tied to paying taxes. That's not currently the standard. So no, we don't believe so. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Charles?
No, I agree with everything you said. Let me ask an additional question. Actually, I like asking questions almost as much as answering them. What do you think, Mary Louise, would they do anything about foreign bank account reporting? at the same time they do something with RBT.
Well, we would definitely hope that there would no longer be any FATCA reporting, any foreign bank account reporting, because obviously the reporting now with FATCA is definitely linked to paying taxes on those accounts and those investments. So hopefully that would go away. We would envision that it would. Don't see why it would remain. FBAR, the foreign bank account report, is you might or might not know, falls under a different code. It's not tax law. It has to do with money laundering, terrorist financing. We're skeptical that that's going to go away anytime soon in anyone's world, no matter what tax legislation is passed. One of the problems with that is obviously if it is effective. A lot of people ask the question: is it really effective in money laundering, drug running? But if it's part of that equation, I think there's not going to be a whole lot of interest in any congressman's interest in taking that, off the table and taking it away and risking having some horrific terrorist attack or other incident happen because for some reason they didn't have the information from that filing. I don't know. Charles, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Absolutely. People in government, people in Congress, Treasury, a lot of people are just scared to death that they'll miss something and some terrible event will take place like 9/11. And people looking backwards will say, well, it was really not helpful to do away with FBARs. So I agree with you.
A question, can individuals living abroad really take charitable tax deductions when they have no U.S. income? So you might just want to clarify the tax deduction aspect of ACAGF.
That's an invitation to be wrong about some detail.
Okay.
So certainly you're entitled to the fact that you're a resident overseas, that you're claiming any benefits from that, like foreign earned income exclusion, anything like that. You're still entitled to take the charitable deduction. What effect it's going to have on your return, that I'm going to let our friends in the wonderful large or not so large return preparation firms take you through the detail. I think they would first say, well, let's look at your last year return and I'll tell you whether you want to do this or not. So that's my coward's answer to that question.
So another question that's come in about U.S. banks turning away customers because you don't have a U.S. address. So that's a completely separate issue, has nothing to do really with tax legislation and any change to RBT. It has very much to do with U.S. banks' interest in knowing their clients. And this is definitely a fallout of 9/11, definitely a fallout of terrorist financing, and another one of those difficult issues because it's not really legislated, but it is policy that private banks are implementing because they want to make sure that their client base, that they're not funding any illegal activity or terrorist activity. So the U.S. address issue for U.S. banks might very well remain. One of the solutions some of you on this webinar may know about or may not know about is through your ACA membership, you have the ability to apply for a State Department federal credit union bank account. And this is a US based bank account. If you're living overseas, you do not have to provide a US address. You need to provide some address, some physical address, some proof that you are who you are. But you don't need to have a U.S. address, but you will have access to a U.S. bank account. They have many other products, savings accounts. I'm going to make a mistake here. I can't recall if they have an IRA or 401k. Charles, you probably know. Apologies for not knowing that. But you can definitely do wire transfers to your SDFCU account, to your foreign bank account. So for example, if you received a COVID stimulus check, you can have it deposited into your SDFCU account and then transfer it over to your foreign account. You can have your Social Security payments. You can set up, automatic debit for U.S. banking needs. I mean, there are a lot of our members who have elderly parents. They're doing elder care, or they have children who are at university. So it's it's been hugely popular with our membership. So that's one way to help with the U.S. Address problem that currently exists with banks, and really can't say, what would happen on that front. But RBT, I don't think would change it.
I'm very tempted to say that this account, the State Department Federal Credit Union, is the best thing since sliced bread. People really need to slow down and look at this. I think that just about everybody that's listening to this should have one of these accounts. You don't even have to fund it to anything other than a very minimum level. What's amazing to people is that you can open it entirely online. You can open it scanning ID material and sending it in. It's very quick, very easy. Even I opened mine in about 15 minutes. So I highly recommend taking a look at it. And it would be, you'll like it when you pay attention to the details. I can almost guarantee. What's next? What other questions? Oops.
I muted myself there. One of the questions that's come in is, will RBT eliminate the windfall elimination provision? That's another issue that sort of is outside of, it's not really a tax issue, so to speak. It might be something that in the conversation about RBT, we always bring it up as another one of the problems for Americans who are living overseas and their pensions being considered part of the windfall elimination provision. But it's really a Social Security problem more than a tax problem. But it definitely would open up the opportunity for discussions about the windfall elimination provision. There are a couple of bills in Congress right now asking to eliminate the WEP. There's been some support in the Biden administration for doing something. We haven't really seen any movement on elimination of WEP, but it was something that was talked up in the election cycle. Do you have any thoughts, Charles, to add to that?
Yeah, I think that Congress could reach over and address that alongside of RBT. Then some person really paying attention could say, would that somehow cause a problem under a reconciliation activity? Would that cause a problem for RBT? And I would say that's a real good question, and it'll have to be addressed at that time, because non-tax things in a bill can cause a reconciliation problem. More detail than you want to hear, but it shows that all of us, and in particular Mary Louise and I, need to pay close attention to the tiny detail. What's next?
Will RBT eliminate the Medicaid as supplemental of capital gains tax, the 3.8 on,
Yeah, investment income, yeah. Will it eliminate it? Can we just go to some background music while I think about that? I think the answer is yes, but don't shoot me if I think the answer is yes, because I think the answer is yes. That's a tax provision. It's clearly double taxation, and so I think the answer is yes, until someone comes along and tells me I'm wrong. Okay.
all right. So what is the timeline and goalpost for the July 1 deadline for donations? What if you don't meet the full 75,000? So we're, I'll just jump right in. We're really confident with the way things are going that we're going to get there. I think to Charles' point, we all have to be positive. We all have to be confident. I think we're going to get to 75,000. I think we're going to fund this. This is important. We're going to keep raising funds. You know, all of ACA is pretty much volunteer outside of a small administrative staff. We rely on membership fees and donations into the organization. And then when we have specific efforts like raising money for the DEG research, we will launch a separate campaign. Most times when it's research and education, it's done out of ACAGF because that's the purpose of that organization. So we will keep pushing on and raise funds, because we're definitely going to need to go into offices and present all that data. We're confident that we're going to get there. Charles, do you have any thoughts?
No, other than we are going to get there, and people can help us get there. But we have plans for absolutely making that goal, and it does match with people not looking at their shoes but getting active. A good way to get active is to make a contribution. It does not have to be humongous. If you want to make it humongous, that would be terrific. I think the largest element is something like $10,000, but most of it is a smallish size. And when we look back to the last fundraising, can't remember, Julie would know, but the average was several hundred or maybe a bit more. So do something. Don't just look at your shoes. Do something.
So here's a question directly to you, Charles. Do you think RBT might move forward more readily if the strong against abuse and revenue neutral considerations embedded in a proposed legislation put in income thresholds?
I have to say, I'm not really sure. Help me with the question, Mary Louise. Rephrase it so it goes into my brain.
Would it be perhaps not available to everyone? Would there be an income threshold by which people would not be able to avail themselves to RBT? Would that help get to the revenue neutrality and the tight against abuse?
Oh, so there was some rule that everybody can get into RBT, but no, stop, not truly rich people. No, I don't think they'll go in that direction. There are other subtle ways to deal with the issue. What would be an example? Well, a question will be what to do with people resident in zero tax jurisdictions, so-called tax havens. That's a little touch of the same thing. What to do with people who are U.S. now, residing in the U.S. and then have built up a business, say, and then move to Bermuda or Monaco or someplace, and then cash out and claim that they don't owe any U.S. tax. That will probably be addressed under the category of anti-abuse. So, but not just a level that says if you're really rich, you don't get the RBT benefits. I don't see that happening. For one thing, it's way too inelegant.
Great.
Next.
Another question, since Congressman Holding has retired, who is the biggest proponent in Congress for RBT and for pushing this issue? So something here I'll mention, it's not to say that individual representatives are not important. They're hugely important, as we all know, but equally important, and sometimes even more important, are the committees who are actually digging into this subject, who are the ones who would be responsible for drafting legislation, who are the ones who are really looking at the numbers. So a lot of ACA's time is spent talking to committees and doing that work, as well as beating the drum for getting more support, congressional support, individual members. So we're doing that. We continue to do that. There are some members on the Americans Abroad Caucus that are definitely interested. There are many offices that Charles and I have both been in, and that I have been in, that we've turned on to this topic. There is a campaign, a write-in campaign that we have calling for hearings. I encourage everyone, as well as donating to the research project, to also do the write-in campaign for hearings, because on the back end of that campaign, we can see the number of offices that have been contacted. And we go into those offices and knock on those doors. And it has been phenomenally helpful to us, because when I've gone into, say, an office that has received 20 communications, doesn't take much. You would think, oh, 10 or 20 messages into an office, that's not going to do anything. Those people know that they have been, those offices know that they have been contacted. They've already researched ACA. They know us. They're happy to meet with us. So that campaign is really helping us fill out our list of targets. So yes, on both sides of the aisle, this is not something that's just a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. We're seeing support on both sides, and ACA is building that list. We have a new Congress, a lot of familiar faces, some new faces. So yeah, there are supporters. Any thoughts, Charles?
I'll just lay alongside of that until someone at the very end said, people in Congress, who's important. I was about ready to say the most important player at the moment may be actually the Treasury Department.
Yeah.
Treasury Department is putting together proposals. You'll see another version of this into the so-called Green Book coming out in just a matter of days. Treasury Department is, I think, looking at this subject alongside the corporate provisions for a number of reasons, and maybe we'll have another webinar on that, but there are strong indications, in my opinion, that they are looking at it quite seriously. Little things like the way their organization chart was redone to bring in more OECD specialties. That's going to bring in issues of zero tax, exchange of information, and closing the gap. You can read backwards from their personnel changes. Enough of that. The answer is, I think that a big important player is Treasury Department. It is the people in Office of Tax Policy and Office of Tax Analysis. Extremely important.
And those are the offices, just to kind of tie that up. We're on speed dial with them, so to speak. So we're putting a lot of focus, not all our focus, but obviously a lot of focus on those offices, as well as building, like I said before, the congressional support. This might be a little bit of a, sorry.
They can help us. They can help us hugely. We can also help them. Okay, next.
This might be a little bit of a repeat, but would RBT mean that Americans living abroad be allowed to invest money in securities without present limitations? I'm assuming that it's the problem of investing, sort of the PFIC problem and the foreign investment problem.
Yeah, I think that has multiple parts to it. I've been impressed with some of the problems are actually not the U.S. problems, but the non-U.S. regulatory issues coming out of the non-U.S. versions of a Securities and Exchange Commission in this country or that country. So it has different elements to it. So I can't give more detail than that. I can't wave the wand and say RBT would solve the problem entirely. RBT addresses the U.S. federal income tax issue.
Great. So I think we're getting towards the end of most of the questions. One that I've seen a couple of times. What's the timing? When do we think things may happen? As you saw in the presentation, we really think there's going to be movement on tax legislation in the fall. We're getting ourselves prepared. That's why we're working to raise funds. We've already started the project with District Economics Group. We're starting to go out and get the data because we realize how very, very important that is. And again, we have full confidence that we're going to get to the funding and get to the end of it. When might something like RBT be passed? I wish I had a crystal ball. I think probably Charles wishes he had 2 or 3 crystal balls. I don't know, Charles, if you can give any thoughts on that.
Nobody knows. The not the administration, not Janet Yellen, not anybody up and down Treasury. Nobody can really absolutely say, because there are moving parts, and a lot's going to be determined by how things work out in the negotiations up on Capitol Hill, which are not just negotiations about a tax, but also the budget. They're going to have to lift the budget limitation, or else they're going to have a huge mess on their hands. So all of that goes into the mix. Back to the question, isn't that terrible that you've got so many things going on at the same time? It depends upon your view of life. I think it's great because it will present opportunities for the people who are, I'll use the overworked term, for people who are agile and have done their homework. It will present opportunities.
Great. I think we're getting to the end. We've almost at the half hour. So just to tie up from the questions that have come in, if anything didn't get answered, if you want to get in touch with us, your thoughts, questions, please do send them to the addresses that you see up there on the screen. You will receive a follow-up email with contact information. A few people are interested in getting some of the links to our website, the RBT Coalition website. So we'll definitely be sending that. So please do get in touch. And the takeaway, at least from my perspective, and let Charles have a few words on this as well. Please join the effort, stay positive, stay behind, become a member of ACA if you're not. Contribute to the research project. I can't stress enough how important. I think you've heard both Charles and I say numbers are going to be really important to this exercise if we want to get to RBT. Take a look at the RBT Coalition if you're part of an organization or a group. Consider asking to join the RBT Coalition. And from my perspective, thank you very much for taking the time to sit through the presentation. We hope it was really beneficial. Again, send us questions. We will send you links. And Charles, do you have any closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I see some positive things. One positive thing I see is the response to this webinar. We have been very pleased, I won't say blown away, but near blown away by the response and to this webinar, and things that are coming in day after day. And the other positive thing is, I think, reading between the lines, I think that many of the people on Capitol Hill and in Treasury Department, they are positive, they believe that something's going to happen RBT. Otherwise, they wouldn't be calling us as often with the detailed questions that they are coming with. So those two positive things, the attention of our members and this audience, and frankly, the attention of people on Capitol Hill and in Treasury Department. Enough said.
Well, with that, I think I want to thank everybody who attended. Thanks for taking the time. Special thanks to Julie Sanford, our administrative director, who runs the show on the back end and makes these webinars possible for us. And again, you'll be receiving a follow-up email, and please feel free to get in contact with ACA. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.